All right, we're on the air now. Are we good? We're live? All right. Hey, party people. What's up? You guys ready to WordPress it up with me for a little bit? WordPress in the house. I'm Brian Messenlehner. I'm a co-founder and CTO of WebDevStudios. We're a WordPress-only development shop. That means if you guys try to come to us and ask us to do anything else that doesn't integrate with WordPress in any way, we'll tell you to go away. Right? But we're here to talk about WordPress. So WordPress is pretty awesome. I'm calling in from my home in Wall Township, New Jersey. And let's get started with the slides. You guys ready? I can't hear you. Still can't hear nothing. Is anybody there? Psych. I know you guys can't talk and I can't hear you. So, all right, let's switch over to the sides. Share screen. Let me put it on my slides and I'm going to share it now. So we're going to be talking about moving all the things to WordPress. Before we get started, I'm going to tell you a little story about Joe Schmo company out there. And they have their website or web app or mobile app or whatever on some kind of proprietary solution. And they're paying a ton of money on licensing fees, on hiring developers that really don't know what they're doing because they didn't build the system. And the original guy that did isn't there anymore. So they're paying, the new guy to figure out what the heck it is first before he's trying to build on top of it. As you can imagine, this day and age with open source solutions like WordPress, more and more companies are switching over from their bulky, prehistoric proprietary systems over to something very elegant and easy to use and easy to manage like WordPress. So again, my name is Brian Messenlehner. I'm the CTO and co-founder of WebDevStudios. This is my book, Building Web Apps with WordPress. It talks about using WordPress as an application framework. WordPress is a lot more than a blog. We'll talk about that in a little bit too. These are some of our companies and brands. So WebDevStudios, we're a service-based company. We focus on enterprise level WordPress development. We do a lot of cool things here. Really pushing WordPress to the limits, integrating with third-party systems, doing all sorts of cool stuff. We also own maintain.com. This is our WordPress support and maintenance company. So if you need any type of WordPress support, ongoing updates, anything like that, this is a company to do that. AppPresser, this is a separate company for WebDevStudios. This is really cool. This is basically a framework for building mobile applications with WordPress. Some people are like, what does that even mean? How do you build mobile applications with WordPress? Well, there's this open source system called PhoneGap. If you think of PhoneGap as how WordPress is open source for building websites, PhoneGap is open source for building mobile applications. The idea is you build it once and it runs on both iOS and Android the same way. So essentially all AppPresser is a series of WordPress plugins that builds a bridge between PhoneGap and WordPress. We also have Reactor. This is our hosted version of AppPresser, basically, where you could log in and point it to your WordPress site, suck all the data into your app, build an app, and launch it into the App Store. Pluginize is a new brand we just launched for selling WordPress plugins, premium WordPress plugins. We also release a lot of plugins in the WordPress repository. This is a cool site. We actually built the official WordPress plugin for Shopify, and we're about to release the official WordPress plugin for Constant Contact. So we're very excited about Pluginize. So why WordPress, right? The first answer is that it's open source. I mentioned this a little bit before. All these companies are still paying tons and tons of money, hundreds of thousands of dollars a year if they're, a big company in licensing fees for software. Can you imagine if WordPress, cost $1,000 a month just to use it? That would be insane, right? If that was the case, it probably wouldn't have over 26% of the internet using it. So Number one reason why to use WordPress, it's free, it's open source, it's great. You own your own content, right? You have access, if you're self-hosting it, you have access to all of your content. It's yours. You could do whatever you want with it. Some of these proprietary solutions, you don't actually own your data. You can't get to it if you need to. And I'll talk about a story about a client of ours that happened to, where they had about 80 sites and they didn't have access to their content. Most of the data should always be stored the same way. And what I mean by this is if you're working with a proprietary solution on a custom database schema, who knows what that schema looks like, right? You're going to have stuff stored all over the place. Maybe some other developers came in after the initial developers and added their new tables and did some other stuff. It can get messy. So with WordPress, the standard database schema is pretty straightforward, and all of your data is pretty much stored the same way every time. When people come to us and they ask, like, hey, I want to build a website that does this, does that, does this. Yeah, there's going to be some custom functionality that we build into that. But guess what? Most of the time, 9 times out of 10, that data is all going to be stored the same way. It's all going to be stored in custom post types and user meta. There's some instances where making a table does make sense, but the majority of the time, we don't have to do that. So WordPress is extendable with plugins. If you're new to WordPress, definitely go do a search for WordPress plugins on WordPress.org and check out the thousands of plugins that are available. If you know WordPress, then you know plugins are what makes WordPress WordPress. Like I was just talking about before, WordPress started off as blogging software, but over the time has become much more than that, and especially with plugins, because you have plugins that could do pretty much anything that you need it to do, almost anything that you could think of. And if it doesn't exist already, you can create it yourself. If it does 80% of what you want it to do, hey, it's open source. You could fork it, you could hack it up and make it do what you want to do. WordPress is easy to manage and update, so you could easily update to new versions of it. You could update all the plugins with virtually a click of a button. Before you click that button, though, if you're not used to updating WordPress, definitely make sure that you are making a backup of everything. And then WordPress is also an application framework. At the end of the day, it's a MySQL database and PHP and JavaScript and HTML, right? So you could make it do whatever you want. You could build any type of website, web application, any type of web portal, anything that you want to call it, right? It's a full-blown web application. So we're going to talk about some of the available tools that are out there for kind of just moving some data around. So the first one we're going to talk about is WordPress to WordPress. This is probably the simplest export import utility that you'll find for moving basic sites over. And the reason that you would move a site would be maybe you're switching hosts, or you're launching a new one and you want to import some old posts that you have from another blog into the new blog or website. So this is a very basic tool. It's the WordPress plugin or WordPress importer plugin, and you could import WordPress to WordPress. It exports an XML file, and basically you go to the new site and you import an XML file. I'm not going to go into great detail about this, but if you're not aware of this, you should check it out. Kind of a more beefed up plugin that we like to use a lot is the WP All Import, and it has a really slick drag and drop interface. You could set up imports to pull in data from CSV files, from XML files, and from JSON files, and you just kind of click through and decide, do your mappings and where you want the data to go, and it imports data into custom post types, custom taxonomies, custom meta fields, and users. And there's a premium plugin for this, is WP-All-Import.com if you want to check it out. And this we use a lot for kind of small migrations, pulling data in if we have CSV files, stuff like that. Now, a lot of times, if you're building something yourself that it has a lot of data, maybe it's too big, or you have a really custom data migration into WordPress, this tool might not be feasible for you. There's also some slick web services out there. There's one called If This Then That, And basically, you could log in, you create an account, and you can make all these recipes. And you can connect with these recipes. You can connect different web services. So, for example, I could connect to my Instagram account, and I could, whenever I take a picture of something on Instagram and send it to Instagram, IFT will automatically take it from Instagram and put it into my WordPress site. And through their UI, you could choose, you could log into WordPress, connect to your WordPress site. You could choose what posts that you want to go to, what taxonomy, what categories, what post meta, all that stuff you could tie into it. It's a really cool feature. There's also a slick web service called Zapier. It's kind of the same idea as IFT, where you can create all these apps to do various tasks like move data around back and forth between systems. So do-it-yourself imports. Like I was saying before, sometimes you're going to have a really custom database migration. Maybe you're pulling data from 5 different data sources into one WordPress install. There's going to be times if you're a developer or that you're going to need to do stuff like this, or if you have a website or looking to move onto WordPress, you might have to hire a developer to custom build something for you. So the first step to a custom WordPress migration is really knowing your WordPress database structure and all of your insert and update functions. Now, within core WordPress, there's a bunch of insert and update functions for getting the data into the various tables within WordPress. It's a good idea if you're going to be doing your own custom migration that you know exactly what these functions are and how they work, and have a firm understanding of your WordPress database. You need to just look at it. So here's a slide of all the WordPress tables in a default install. I'm not going to go over all of them in too much detail, but if you don't know these tables, you should get in there and check them out. Just take a look at it, right? Just look at this stuff. The quickest way, if you don't know how to get to your database, is probably on your host. They probably have a link somewhere when you're logged in called phpMyAdmin. You can get in there and start looking at your table structure. So once you have a firm grasp of how WordPress works and how the WordPress database schema is structured and how the data is stored and what functions put and update and touch whatever columns and whatever tables, the next step is to identify your data sources, right? So you have a data source and you have your data destination. Your data source could be anything. Your data destination is WordPress. So some custom data sources could include a custom database schema, a MySQL database, a Microsoft SQL Server database, an Oracle database, even a Microsoft Access database. In some cases, there's a lot of companies probably still using Access and aren't on a web-based application yet, and maybe they want to pull a bunch of stuff over. You could also have physical files. You could have a bunch, one or many CSV files. You could have XML files, JSON files, or even HTML files that you need to pull data from. So you could have physical files, or maybe these are results from an API. Maybe you're getting a JSON response from an API and you need to pull that data in and import that or sync it with data that you have currently set up in WordPress. So understanding your data structure of your data source and how it is stored is also very important. You need to understand both sides of the fence, really, right? You need to understand how WordPress is going to store the information, and you got to understand how the information is being stored in the current system, so you could extract that information and plug it into WordPress. Another thing you want to look for when identifying your data source, once you have access to it, is looking, kind of spot checking some of the data and making sure that the data is consistent. Where things are being stored, where they said they're being stored. Maybe that you don't have special characters that could potentially mess up your script, stuff like that. So this is the #1 thing that you want to do if you're doing freelance work, or you're working with clients and you're working on a data migration. You want to have a data mapping document. Even if you're not, you still want to have one anyway, because it's a good blueprint and a visual aid for you to look at to know exactly at any point in time, oh, okay, I'm taking this data from here and I'm putting it over there. So the data mapping guide really gives you a guide to build your script from. It's basically giving you a blueprint of what the data that you're moving. There's no disputes about what data is being migrated. If you don't make a data mapping document and you engage in a client in a large scale migration, you're going to be hurting for certain, because it's probably not going to work out well. Or maybe you'll get all the way done with your migration and they'll be like, oh, well, what about this data? This was supposed to be brought over to over here. And then depending on how you built your migration script, you're either going to have to basically wipe the database clean and update your code to account for this new stuff, or you're going to have to write an additional script to run afterwards, and we call them like follow-up scripts. And if you're building a custom migration or ever have, you know exactly what I'm talking about. So it's a good idea to map your document, so when the client comes back and says, oh, we want to move this, you pull up your document, here it is. Oh, actually, that never happened. That's not part of the plan. Map source data fields to various CPTs, taxonomies, and metadata. So, you want all your data to go to the correct spot. So it's important to not only map your posts, but map your authors, map your various terms for different taxonomies that you have set up, and define what those are and where they're going. Maybe in your script, you're pulling everything out of a database that's in one giant table, and it's broken up by a column that's has some various values. And depending on what that value is, say the values are A, B, and C, you want to take A, everything that's value A, and move it over to a taxonomy in WordPress called taxonomy A. Well, you'll have to build that into your script, and you should account for that, kind of your logic, if you will, in the data mapping guide. So looking at the data mapping guide, it'll paint a clear picture of data coming from this table, but where this column equals this, it's going into this CPT or this other CPT. You also, it's very important to mark your primary and foreign keys or equivalent if you're not working with tables. You're working with various XML files. Well, somewhere there's going to be a node in there that connects that whatever the data is in that particular file to maybe some data in another file. So it's important that to store all of these relationships in WordPress when you're actually importing these records. So because you'll need to retain your current relationships. And what I mean by that is, imagine, say that you have a Drupal site and you want to move to WordPress, right? Say you have some content in there, and that content has an author, and that content has a bunch of images attached to it, and that content has a bunch of comments attached to it. Well, when you bring all of those things over to WordPress, you want to retain those relationships so that when you go to that new post that you imported in WordPress, guess what? You're going to have your author, you're going to have all your comments, you're going to have the images all there attached to that post. And the way that you do that is when you bring over a piece of content from your data source, if it has a unique identifier, you store that as meta against the post. So say I'm bringing a piece of content over from Drupal, right? I import it, insert it into WordPress. I have a unique identifier, node ID. I store that node ID in WordPress. So that when I go to import the comments, I do a meta query against the post, and I say, give me everything where the meta key node ID or Drupal node ID equals, say, 50. And okay, cool, it returns something. This is post ID 5. Well, attach all my comments or my author or the images to post ID 5. So that's important when you're retaining your relationships. It's time to build your import script, right? So the order of operations usually work from top down, right? So if you're working with multi-site and you're importing any amount of sites, then you would import those first and import any options into the options table that each of those sites are using, if any. After that, you would switch over to your users and import all of your users into WordPress and any user meta. After that, you move on to your posts. Now, while you're looping through your posts and you get return a new post ID for each post that you insert, you can connect that post to the appropriate author. And it's important to do, I guess, this order of operations here, because if you're inserting a post and there's no users yet, then you'll have to do it later, I guess. But you could see where I'm going with this, that you wouldn't be able to attach an author to a post because the author doesn't exist yet. So we like to run users first, then posts, connect the users to posts, sideload any attachments or images to that post, then move on to comments and insert the comments. And then while you're inserting the comments, connect the comments to any posts that they're supposed to be attached to, and connect the comment to any user that authored that comment. And then you move on to your taxonomy terms and connect any terms to any posts. So this is just an example. I don't even think it has real syntax in here, but the idea is for all these WordPress components, posts, users, comments, that you're looping the post content from your data source, and then you're doing a meta query for the original unique identifier, which we talked about, and this is where your logic's going to set in. So if no meta value for original unique identifier exists, then hey, guess what? You haven't imported that record yet. So you're going to run WP insert post, and you're going to insert that record, however you have it set up to, from the data that you're pulling over from your data source into a new post in WordPress. If you find that identifier, else if it does exist, you could either skip it, or what we like to do, depending on the data source, if they have a source date or a modified date in your data source, then we could actually check that against the WordPress modified date. And if the data source date is greater than the modified date, then we know that, hey, this record has been updated. And this comes into a scenario more than just a one-time import, but maybe you have some kind of integration with another third-party system where you need to sync data every day, say. And say they update data on their side, and they want that data to be brought over and updated on WordPress. Well, you're going to want to check to see the dates to do that. Also, if you're planning on doing a migration of a brand new site or something, and a client provides you with a data dump of whatever database, and you write your script and you run the import, you're caught up until the time that they handed over that data dump to you. But what happens when you go to launch and there is, say, 3 weeks worth of content that you don't have yet? Well, they're going to provide another dump to you, and they're going to expect that you add it in. So you could either do two things. You could wipe your whole database and start over up until that point in time. But depending on how big of a data set that you're working with, that could take a long time. I mean, when we're doing large scale migrations and migrating literally like millions of records, then it's not just a quick click a button and wait 5 minutes and all your content's there. That may work for thousands of records and stuff, but when you start getting into tens of thousands and hundred thousands of records, that's not efficient. So by checking the modified date when you have a certain amount of data up to a certain amount of time, and the client hands you a Delta file or the newest database dump, you could just run the script and it'll basically skip everything that's already been imported and then just import the new stuff, right? So you'll save some time doing that. Everything else works about the same way. The users, loop through the users, loop through the comments, loop through the terms, all that stuff. So once you kind of have that set up, it's time to run your script. The first thing to do, of course, is make a backup of your database. Anytime you're writing anything really that interacts with any data, you should be making a backup of your database. And especially, and I'm not saying that they should ever run this on production at all. I'm saying make a backup of your staging environment even, because that'll save you if you happen to mess something up in your script and then you overwrite a bunch of stuff that maybe was already there. You're going to have to go through and basically rebuild your staging site again from your production. And this gets to my point before: run locally or run on a staging site. You never want to run a migration script on a production site. It's really not a good idea. While you're executing your import, you could do that via trigger. You can make a custom UI to click a button that says import users, import posts, import everything, whatever you want really. Or you could pass in a query string, something like into the URL, like something like import users equals true, and that'll import our users. While you're actually importing users, you could output some data to the browser if you want, to show you how many imported users to place, or how many users were skipped or updated or whatever. custom CLI commands. So WordPress CLI, if you don't know what that is, you should definitely Google that, because that is your friend. So once your data has actually been imported and you're moving data out of your data source into your data destination, WordPress, then it's important to QA your content, right? If you say, hey, all this data is done, and you didn't really thoroughly look it over and make sure that it's correct, and you hand that off, then your client is probably going to be pissed when they stumble upon some content that isn't set up correctly. So the first important thing that you could do is check your counts, right? If you have 1,000 records, 1,000 posts in your data source, and you have 100 posts in WordPress, then it didn't work out. It's time to look over, see what happened, troubleshoot. And the opposite too, right? If you have 1,000 posts in your data source and you have 10,000 posts in WordPress, then it's time to start troubleshooting again. Those numbers should match up exactly, unless you're doing something like in your script, only pulling out posts that have a certain status or something. And if that's the case, you should know what the counts are of those posts in your original database, your data source, that you should know what those counts are for that particular query, so that you could always match up. Like, the count should always be the same. If they're not the same, then something happened. Even if they're a couple off, it's a good idea to identify what the reasoning is behind that. The second thing to do is to check your content. Depending on what your content is, you could write little scripts to go through and try to do this for you. But the best way to do it really is to just spot check a bunch of stuff. It's better to spend an hour of your time spot checking content than spending 5 minutes spot checking your content. Obviously, the more time that you spot check, the better it's going to be. But that's really going to save you in the long run, because you don't want your client or random people on the internet finding out that you basically imported something wrong or incorrectly. So it's very important to check all your content. Check your relationships. This is also very important, right? We were just talking about before how when you import posts, you want to retain those relationships. You want to import all the correct comments and the correct author and attach them to that post. Now, if you have comments not showing, the wrong number of comments showing up for a post, then something's wrong. If you have wrong comments showing up for that post, then something's wrong. If you don't have users attached to your post and you were supposed to import users, then something's wrong. So it's a good idea to check all your relationships. And for this, you can refer back to your data mapping guide, right? Look at it. Look at your data mapping guide and go through each one and say, this was supposed to go to this. Did it happen? Is my count correct? Are the relationships retained? And then once you're looking good and everything's good to go, you prepare to launch, right? So you create, if you didn't already, this is what we were just talking about on your staging server. You implement 301 redirects plan and verify. So an important part of, say, migrating an existing website over to WordPress is retaining those URLs, right? If those links, if those pages are already linked to from other websites, you want to retain them. So you need to retain, when you're importing, and this is important too, the original URLs. So that way you could easily build a 301 redirect strategy into your launch. Verify all media resources are available on production server. So whether if they give you, say, a zip file with images in it, and that's part of your migration script, is to go in, to that zip or the directory and get those images, and that's one thing. But a lot of times, if you're migrating from a live production website and you have the URLs in a database, or at least the file names, and you have to construct what the actual URLs are, those resources are available online. So you can just go grab them and sideload them. But if the website isn't online, then you're not going to be able to get those images. So you got to make sure that when you're importing images or any media files or anything, that those files are where they're supposed to, are where they are supposed to be. Freeze the production website. That's kind of an obvious one. Yeah, you can't, if you have people adding content in there, they can't add you won't be able to import that and retain all that content, even though there's some ways that you can do that. Make a backup of the production before you swap it out, rerun the import on the freshest dump, and then swap URLs and verify and launch. And this prepping process may be different depending on your situation, but that's, in a nutshell, it's going to be something close to that. Some pro tips are use a mule server for big migrations. And what I mean by mule server is using it as a mule. So it's doing the heavy lifting, right? You don't want to run all these intense scripts that are moving data around and eating up resources. You don't want to run that on your, anywhere that's connected to your production website, right? You don't want to bring down your website because you're running massive amounts of data. So you want to set up a separate server just to do that. Its sole purpose is just to, loop through that data, process it, and put it into WordPress. Store all of the original URLs. I just touched on this a minute ago. Very important. If you don't do that and you launch and without implementing 301s from these original URLs, then your client is going to be very upset, and you're going to be trying to hit up Wayback Machine and copy and paste, hopefully not thousands and thousands of pages of URLs into your new WordPress setup. So make sure that you definitely retain your original URLs for any content that you're moving over. Store all of the original unique identifiers. I can't stress this enough, especially if you're retaining relationships. You need those original unique identifiers from your data source. Prefix imported meta keys. So this goes back to the unique identifiers, right? Let me give you a scenario. We're moving content from 2 different systems into WordPress, right? Maybe both of those systems are Drupal, and they both are going to have node IDs. Now, when I bring over a post from the first Drupal site, maybe it has a node ID of 5. Now, and import's fine. Now, when I bring over data from the second Drupal site, hey, it also has a node ID of 5. So what's going to happen? It's going to think it's a duplicate. It's going to skip it. You're going to jack up your relationships. So it's always a good idea to prefix your data, your meta keys for the imported data, with something that relates to that data source. So I would say Drupal1 underscore user ID, or Drupal1 underscore node ID, and Drupal2 underscore node ID. Even if you you have a one data source to one WordPress install, it's a good idea just for best practice to prefix your data source meta keys anyway. That way, if you ever need to bring over anything from another system later on, right? Because you never know what could happen, then you'll already have those keys there, and you could use a different key. Delete hello worlds. This isn't that big of a deal if you're just doing one unique install WordPress, but if you're using importing into multi-site at the site level, if you just imported 1,000 sites, it's going to suck to write a script to go through and delete hello world at each single one. CLI is your friend. It really is. So if you don't know CLI, definitely Google that. Disable WP mail, right? How many people have somehow sent out mail, even working locally, by accident? It happens. So when you're migrating content, especially when you're adding users, you want to disable WP mail. The last thing you want is to import 5,000 users and get some, and 5,000 people are getting some email to your staging site with a bunch of, BS in it. That's not going to be a good look for you or for your client, and they would probably be upset. So anytime you're working with especially users like that, disable WP mail. Run cleanup script for assigning parent IDs last. And this makes sense, right? Because if I'm going through and say I'm importing pages and each page has a parent ID, well, when I'm importing those, some of those parent IDs aren't going to exist yet, right? Because I didn't get to them yet in the import. So really what I'm saying is you have to import everything first, all your pages, and make sure you have them all, and then circle back and loop through them and assign them to whatever parent IDs that they should be assigned to. And when this is all said and done, flush the rewrite rules. That can cause you a problem. So I'm going to take a few minutes to talk about some cool migration projects that we've done. Let's see. I'm hoping that everybody can still see my slides here. Can you see my slides? Someone say yes. Okay, thanks, guys. All right, so cool migration projects. So the first one I'm going to talk about is drugfree.org. Everybody, at least from the 80s, or that were teenagers in the 90s, probably remember the egg. You know, they crack the egg in the pan. This is your brain. This is your brain on drugs. So these are those people, drugfree.org. We got to work with them and build them a really cool brand new website. So they had, this was a pretty intense migration, right? They had 2 WordPress sites already. They had 3 expression engine websites. They had a Drupal site, and they had 3 custom .NET applications with custom SQL Server database schemas. And they wanted to basically combine all of these different systems into one WordPress install. So that was super intense. You know, that's where making the meta key prefixes were very important, right? Because we had data coming from 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 different data sources. So the solution, we built multiple data sources importing into a single WordPress install, multiple custom post types and taxonomies for those different types of data. It was a BuddyPress integration, so they're making basically a social network of people. BBPress for forms, and a super intense database migration. So this was a super fun project. Here's a little screenshot of that site. Super cool. Go check it out if you have a chance. So some of you guys may have heard of this company. I don't know, maybe not. But they wanted to build a internal training system for their employees, right? Where their baristas can go in, you know, new hires can come and they could watch a video of some equipment, and then they take a test. And if they fail the test, they could take a variation of the test. And if they fail the test again, then they're fired. So the managers could log in at any point in time and see how this was, you know, how they were doing on their tests and kind of grade them accordingly. It's a really cool, it was a really cool project. They had all these CSV files for different store locations and CSV files for employees. And we had to do some custom integration with one of their call-in systems where their employees can call in from the phone. So the solution was imported store locations as groups. And I forgot to mention that we use BuddyPress for this as well. And the way that was set up was basically each store, each Starbucks store equals a BuddyPress group. And then we imported all the employees as users and attached them as members to those groups. So it would be like, you know, instead of being groups users, it would be store employees. And then we added all of the managers as admins to those groups. So it was really cool. Like all the employees, they would be able to log in to their group and they can coordinate with each other. It was this really cool social network. Here's a quick screenshot of that. On to the next one. So lawlinks.com by LexisNexis. If anybody's ever heard of LexisNexis, you know that they're a company that does a lot of custom software development and offers solutions for lawyers and law firms. So as you can imagine, when we started doing work with these guys, working with their lawyers was a huge pain, just because they are who they are, right? That contract wasn't fun. So with this project, there was over 2,500 lawyer websites. They all looked like they were from the 90s. This is funny because if you've ever been to a law firm website, they all look like they're super outdated. And I just had this vision in my head of like some old guy sitting there, you know, the managing partner of the law firm, and he's like, hey, we need a new website. Let's look at Smith & Smith's website and see what they're doing. Well, that's probably the wrong thing to do. because Smith & Sis website looks like it was from the 90s as well. Anyway, each website had its own database in this system. So imagine 2,500 different unique databases. This was a proprietary e-commerce solution that they were using as a CMS. So it wasn't even really a CMS. It was this e-commerce solution that they kind of hacked up, and they had all these different vendors working on creating different templates for different sites. There was no consistency. As you can imagine, it was a huge mess. And this is one of those companies, a little more than a Joe Schmo company, I would say, but that are really trying to tighten their belt and save money and looking to jump ship on maintaining these systems, these old systems, 2,500 websites on the system, and they have vendors working on it, building things differently, and everything's messed up, and it's a huge mess, a huge cluster. Organizing all this stuff into a WordPress multi-site network just makes sense, and it saved them a ton of time and money in the long run. So the solution, as I said, WordPress multi-site network, migrate all content, images, and files from each website. And this was cool, programmatically create Genesis child theme from existing website design. So they actually hired us just to move the data over. They were gonna hire an offshore team to actually rebuild their themes as a WordPress child theme. So Brad and I at the time, we had this really cool idea, like, well, all these sites are live right now. We can get the data from the database. Why don't we write a script to also go to the live website and pull down all the CSS, all the resources, everything that we needed, and programmatically build child themes on the fly, like the actual files for them. So they were like, oh wow, that would be super cool, and we were able to do that. And we had it down to a science to where you literally click a button to for them. We made a little UI where they can click a button to migrate any site that they wanted to, and within a few minutes, boom, they would have their site in this proprietary solution up there. They're looking at it, and then a few minutes later, boom, here's this site looking exactly the same as it did from the data source website. So that was pretty awesome, and it saved them a ton of time and money in the long run. Here is an example of one of the themes that was brought over and generated dynamically. Newark Public Schools. So the district in Newark, New Jersey is one of the largest school districts in the country. It has almost 80 schools / websites in the district. So here gets into licensing, right? They're paying over $100,000 per year for licensing on schoolwires.com. And if you have a second, make a note of schoolwires.com and go check it out and check out some school sites that are running on this. It's a horrible platform, but for some reason, they're holding on to a huge share of the market. But a lot of schools are looking for a better solution, like paying over $100,000 for a website that's not responsive, that URLs look like ID equals 57654375. Like Google doesn't know what that means. It's a horrible user experience for people to update the data. It's not a good system. And there's tons of systems out there, tons and tons of companies using systems like these, or that have rolled their own and should be making the jump over to WordPress and are. So there's no access to data exports or API. So this was interesting, right? So Newark, we get on the phone with our client, and we have a call with SchoolWires, and because they're not giving us a data export of their 80 schools. We get on the phone, they say, we're not going to give you a data export of all your schools, because if we did, then you could re-engineer our database schema, and that's intellectual property. And they're like, what? So long story short, we had to write a custom import script that would go to the front end, go to actually ping each of these sites and scrape all that content. That was a pretty cool project to work on. And the way that we attacked it first was we went after the page hierarchy, right? So we went after the menus, and we were able to basically go through each menu, create a page. Then we went through each one of those pages, went into it, grabbed the content. SchoolWires made it super easy for us, right? Because in each of their pages, they had an HTML comment that said content starts here. And at the end of the content, they had another comment that says content ends here. So I'm like, all right, thanks guys. That was super simple. But that was a cool project. And another thing too, like we never pursued it, but we literally have the script to where you could click a button or put in your Schoolwire's URL, and it would literally be like, run for a couple minutes, and here is your WordPress site. We really never did anything with that, but that would be pretty cool. So I talked about we're setting up each site as kind of their own site on the multi-site network. This custom scraping script. The theme was custom settings imported from spreadsheets. So basically, like, we had some additional spreadsheets that had URLs to the school's logo and their colors that we're using. And basically, we updated the options on each of the sites. So once we ran the script, each site, the final product was each site with all their content, and it was all 5 minutes. 5 minutes left. All right, and it was all kind of dressed up for their school. The number one thing about this project was that it saved Newark almost $100,000 a year that they could use for other things, and they don't have to pay ongoing fees, and all they have to pay now is really some small maintenance and hosting. So MSDN and TechNet networks, we built this for Microsoft, 3 huge blog networks, over 20,000 websites, over 1 million posts, 1.2 million comments, and over 1 million users. So this was by far one of the biggest migrations, or the biggest migration that we ever did. It was super big, and super cool that Microsoft is, even though they are the software giant, they're tightening their belt and looking to save money, just like all these other big companies. So they're jumping ship and going to WordPress instead of maintaining and spending all this money maintaining, supporting clunky older systems. WordPress multi-network. So that might make your head go poof. Check out that plugin, WP Multi-Network. You could actually have multiple networks running multi-site. Hosting on Windows Azure with ClearDB, and CLI scripts to kick off batches when to import. There's a quick screenshot. I'm running out of time. We did a cool data sync with Campbell Soup, where they had a custom API for product and recipe data and multiple facets, taxonomy, and terms. And we made this cool import script where they could actually set up a multi-site subsite on the fly and import any data that they wanted to. So if they wanted to make a subsite for Halloween, they could bring in all these products and recipes that they think that would be related to Halloween. So get better at WordPress by looking at the UI, the code, and the database. Would you just look at it? And thanks, WordSesh 4. I got a couple minutes. Are any of those custom scripts you guys built open source so we can check them out? Not yet, but we're actually we've been working on an internal framework for migrations, and we're planning on coming out with a free version. So that'll be super cool. It'll be a developer tool for doing pretty big migrations, and we hope that more and more companies and people decide to jump ship on whatever they're doing and come over to WordPress, because it is the right choice, and WordPress is awesome. Thanks, everybody, and see you soon. Hit me up on the Twitter at bmess, and my email is brian@webdevstudios.com. Peace.